Well, howdy folks, and welcome back to Pecan Ranch. Today I would like to talk to you folks a little bit about electric fence, the purposes that it serves, a couple of different types of setups, and also a little bit about our rotational grazing. So yesterday we got the the first paddock that the pigs will be put on in the back pasture set up and ready for them to move out here. They'll probably be moving out here within the next day or so. So the first type of electric fence that I want to talk to you about is probably the most useful type, at least in our operation and in a lot of people's operations, and that is a portable or temporary electric fence setup. The most cost-effective means of fencing in an area for your grazing animals. Now, you need to train pigs on electric fence, or cows, cattle, whatever animal you're using. It's best to train them on electric fence before setting them loose and having only electric fence hold them in. But that's relatively easy to do for most animals, pigs particularly because they're so smart. But it could be useful to your operation even if, say, you have a large area like this. This area back here, the back pasture, is about 6 acres or so of grazable land. It's a little bit more than that if you include some of the wooded areas, which we will be having our pigs run through. But let's say you want to rotationally graze and you want to set up paddocks, but you don't want those paddocks to be the same all the time. Then a temporary fence, electric fence, is the way to go. Or it can also be useful for, say you're just, full-time grazing on a particular pasture, but you want to keep your hay out on that pasture, but you don't want your cattle getting to your hay all at once. So you fence it off with electric fence, and that is an inexpensive means of fencing. For instance, the cost of this poly rope right here, I got about a quarter mile, actually a little over a quarter mile of this stuff per roll for $30, versus barbed wire, where a quarter mile cost about $70. So that's already a cost savings there. And then these posts right here, so you can't just go to Atwoods or Tractor Supply and pick these up for 69 cents a piece. They are not. The regular fiberglass post will be roughly $1 a piece. So these are substantially cheaper on Amazon. Don't know how much longer they will last, but these are actually meant for marking driveways and such for like snowy areas. They've got reflective tape on them. They're bright orange, and so I actually like that as an added plus. These aren't as thick. These aren't 3/8. These are 5/16. So they're 1/16 smaller in diameter, but that also makes them a little bit easier to drive into the ground as well. So they're not necessarily as sturdy as the slightly larger diameter ones, but they will serve the purposes that we need for this. And then we've got these screw-in type insulators that we can adjust up and down on this post to whatever height we want. So if we were to move cattle out here, we would keep just the 2-strand setup because we honestly only need one for the pigs and one for the cattle. So we'd have one at pig height and then raise the other one up to cattle height if we wanted to graze the cattle out with the pigs as well. So this is extremely inexpensive and it's also very temporary. It can be moved as you need to be. So even if you don't do consistently rotational grazing and you just need this stuff for a temporary fencing of some kind, and your animals are trained on electric fence, this is a wonderful solution that doesn't cost you a whole lot. So right here I built a physical fence. It's or a gate rather. It's not really a gate as much as it is just a pallet wire tied to 2 T-posts. And the purpose of that is when I want to move the pigs, many people have showed time and time again how painful it is to try and get pigs to go through an area that they believe still has electric fence. Even if you turn this fence off, if they're well trained on it, they're not going to trust you enough to just step through it. Even if you take the wire down, they're going to be real leery of it, and it'll be tough to convince them to come through. But this is not hot, it's not electrified. They will see it, they will spend time around it, and they will know that that is that's a physical barrier that they can't get through, but it doesn't shock them. So when I take this down, it'll leave a nice little opening for them to walk through to the next paddock. So you want to, again, going into, like I spoke previously on planning your farm, you want to think long and hard where you want that gate to be, because that gate is going to be where you, that gate's going to be where you'll be moving them to the next paddock over. So you want to keep that in mind on your gate placement. Now, this is kind of the heart of the setup here, and this is a solar fence charger. This will power 2 miles of fence. Presently, it is powering about half a mile of fence. So a key to selecting fence chargers is you always want to go bigger. You want to have a little bit more charge than what you're trying to run. My general preference is you want at least twice as much. And that is because it's got plenty enough juice going through it, so if some weeds and stuff end up touching that bottom wire, it's not going to ground it out because it's trying to push out to its maximum. If I had this running on 2 miles of electric fence, it may not hold up well if weeds grow up and start touching that bottom wire. It may ground out and not provide as hot of a charge. So I've got a 2 mile charger here. It is solar. And so whenever selecting my spot, I'm always going to be placing this on the gate because I need it to go onto a T-post. And so if you'll notice, I did not drive this T-post in straight in relation to the fence. This particular T-post is facing, is twisted a little bit, and that's because that direction is south. So I've got my solar charger facing the south, and it's not in a shaded area, so it will always get the maximum amount of sun needed. When you purchase one of these solar chargers, there is instructions on it, and they will tell you put it out in the sun and let it charge for 3 days before turning it on and putting it in use, and that allows it to build that battery charge up. So right now it is off, and so I've got my ground lead, and my ground lead is actually wired into I've got it spliced into a jumper cable here. So the reason I've got it spliced into this jumper cable is so that I can just attach it to this T-post to provide my ground. So this T-post that it's setting on is providing my ground, and then the hot lead is running over here, and you can buy these poly tape splicers. They're for poly tape, but they work good for poly rope, and I've just wrapped each strand of poly rope twice and clamped it down on this to provide a good connection here. I have 2 spools. These are just electric cord reels that I have spooled up each of the spools of 1/4 mile of Gallagher poly rope onto, and that way whenever we go to pick it up to move to the next pasture over, we can just spool it up and move on over to the next one. Anyhow, and so what I've done is this spool here is running this side. This spool is running that side to that gate. We have another gate back there that leads to our front pasture. And so the reason I went with 2 spools is so that way we don't have to try and figure out a means of jumpering out these gates. So we have this spool, and on the end of this spool, what I've done is I've tied on one of these T-post insulators and this screw type insulator, and I've modified this insulator like such. I've cut this part out. Normally they look like this, and they have to slip over the top, and the reason for this is so that way I can put this on without having to slip it over. In the event that we already have an insulator on it, we can just clip it into place, and this insulator will stay attached to the end of this this spool at all times. So that way when we spool it up and we go to move to the next setup, we don't have to retie it on every single time and then untie it, or have to clip it because you've tied too good of a knot and you can't get it loose or whatever. So I just start here on the one spool on the bottom strand, go all the way around, and then move up to the top insulators and run it all the way back to this location. So we never have to cut the wires. They always stay on a full spool. And then I've got these oversized clips here, these carabiner style clips that I just clip to the fence, and that keeps them not only up off the ground, but keeps them in one place so that they're not going anywhere. Now, the mounting of this T-post or of this fence charger, you can buy some models that already have built-in slots on the bottom of them to slip on top of a T-post. However, those particular models are relatively expensive, about twice the cost of these style ones. This one only cost me about $100, and you can buy these T-post adapters right here that you can screw, put a piece of wood onto, and I think I paid like 14 bucks for the pair of them. I can also put a link in the description for these T-post adapters. These are useful things just to keep around more than just for this, but the purpose of this is I've got this adapter on here and this piece of wood here, so that all I have to do whenever I'm moving this fence charger is, after we've disconnected our leads off of everything, I just pick it up, slip it off of that T-post, and then move it to the next location. So this whole setup is extremely portable and very easy to work with. I don't have to plug this thing in, so I can put this fence charger anywhere on my property, regardless if I have a connection to an electrical source at all. And these things will work very well. This particular fence charger is relatively new, but I have another one just like it up at the front pasture that I've been using for months, and it works phenomenally. So when designing your layout for your pasture, one, you want to consider, where do I want my animals to graze, and two, how am I going to have them have access to food and water. Now, we'll be bringing out a feeder out here that is a big 250 gallon or whatever size water tote that I'll be modifying into a feeder, and then I have a pond. So I've designed my rotation to revolve around this pond, so that way we'll always have a location which we can have the pigs have access to water. So what I've done is I've just gone a little ways out into the pond, which is where having waterproof boots is useful, and I've stuck some posts in there to run the wire around, so that way the pigs don't get in and swim off to the other side, and then get on the other side and realize there's no fence, and then start wandering around, and then I lose a pig. So if the pond in the summer months gets a little bit low because it's a drier season, I can always scoot this back further in and give them more access to water. That's something that you'll want to monitor whenever you're doing your daily check on your animals, and you want to make sure that they still have good access to water. If it becomes an issue where we can't get good access to water from the pond, we can always bring a water tote out here to allow them to have good access to clean drinking water. So I've set up this particular paddock. It's about an acre or so, a little over an acre. It's actually more like an acre and a half. And they'll graze on this for a little while. But the main reason I'm bringing them out here before the springtime, before everything's really started growing, is because this pasture, as I had mentioned in previous videos, was in terrible shape, and I really need the pigs to come in here and kind of rejuvenate this pasture with the soil disturbance and their fertilizer. That way this pasture will come in pretty strong in the springtime. So I'm wanting to get them out here a little early. Not to mention, I've got this little wooded area that I'm going to have them come into, and they will probably spend a lot of their time in here because I have oak trees that have tons of acorns all around, and I have some pecans in here that have dropped in here, and so they'll get in there, clean it up a little bit for me, and also give them something really yummy to snack on, given the fact that our pasture isn't really green right now. So I've fenced off this area all the way back into here, and they've got a pretty good amount of wooded area to graze on. And if you don't have wooded areas to graze on, it'd be wise to if you don't have shade trees, to figure out some type of shade, and then we could talk more about that on pigs. But we have a natural shade, natural shelter area. They'll probably spend a lot of their time in here, and then hopefully get out into here and get this soil disturbed up for me. I actually have a hunting blind that needs to come down. Season's over. That's one of the main reasons why I'm out here today. The electric fence, it took me and my wife maybe an hour and a half to set this up, and we're also doing so in the rain and whatnot. So we brought the supplies out here, and then we started laying it out. We got all the stakes in, then ran the wire. It took like an hour and a half to set up this 1.5 acre pasture with 2 people. Now, smaller areas would take less time. More people would also probably take less time. The most time consuming part of it is putting the stakes in and getting your insulator set to the right height. So it makes for a quick setup, and it's also not difficult to take down. And if you're doing rotational grazing, a tip that I would give you is that you want to have enough wire to do 2 paddocks and enough stakes and insulators to do 2 paddocks. The reason for that is logistically it just makes it easier, so that way we can have the second paddock set up, which we will be doing so soon. We'll have the second paddock set up before we're moving them over. So we'll have it set up and ready to go, and all we have to do then is open them up into here, and then we can take down all of this. So I'll just be coming through on this shared fence line that I've got set up between the 2 paddocks. On this side, we'll be running stakes or posts just like these along these, and wire along it, so that way when we move them over here, all we have to do then is take down this old one and then move it over to the next one, and just kind of leapfrog your way into your rotational grazing setup. Now, you don't necessarily need to have 2 fence chargers. Might make it a little bit easier for you, but realistically, whenever you move over to the next one, you can just tie this in. These T-posts are staying right where they are for the next paddock. We'll have another one set up on the other side to prepare for the next move. And then whenever we go to move the next move, we'll be taking this charger, moving it over there, and tie it in. Once we move it over there, the wire won't be hot for a few minutes. The pigs are probably not going to even notice, because most of the time they never even touch this. They look at it and say, nope, not touching it. And especially if we're out here, they'll be more focused and paying attention to us rather than the fence, because they like us so much. So this is basically one way to utilize electric fence in your operation. You can use it as a temporary fencing measure, and it works great when setting up a rotational grazing system. Even if, like I said, even if I had good fencing all around this entire pasture, I wouldn't want to set them loose on it all at once full time. I'd want to do rotational grazing, which is a very good practice to use in your operation, especially if you're working real hard for good pasture management and having good quality soil and pasture grasses. So, which I can talk a little bit about that in another video. We can talk about the benefits of practicing rotational grazing. I will show you another setup. It's basically similar, however, it's not for temporary fencing. It's on the front pasture. That electric fencing will remain up there full time and it won't be moved. So I can show you another application of it and give you guys an idea of where you can implement electric fence into your farm. And I would highly recommend just planning on it, because you'll probably find a situation where electric wire is just going to make your life a whole lot easier. So see you folks in a minute, back up at the front pasture. Okay, so we're up back in the front pasture now. We're at the back of the front pasture, and for orientation purposes, the field that we were in earlier is through this trail and through the woods onto the other side. I wanted to just reiterate the importance of having a physical fence, because this will allow the pigs to, once I open it up, for them to understand that they can go through. They have a gate just like this in their pen, and they are understanding of that, but they will not go through this electric. I mean, I could take this poly rope down and they're not going to go through it. I mean, they will eventually, but it'll take some time to convince them. Now, what I've done is I've actually ran a single wire through here. Again, the pigs will respect just one wire, but I didn't feel like I needed to, and honestly, they're just going to be transitioning through here. They're going to walk through here and go out into the pasture. They'll be following me the whole time, so they're not going to be spending unsupervised time in here. So one thing I did not mention on temporary fencing is you want your spacing of your posts to be about 8 to 10 feet. I lean more towards the 10-foot side just so that way I can get more out of my posts. But it also varies on terrain. So some of these spacings are a little bit closer together because we've got a downhill and then uphill. And so in order to keep my wire at the appropriate height, I've got more posts in place. So have your posts set up about 10 feet apart. You could go further with it because the rope really won't sag all that much. But I have noticed that the pigs, when it comes to their the respecting of the wire, sometimes they may not quite notice the wire, but they see the posts. They see the posts first. So if you space out the posts too far, then they may not even notice it and walk right into it or walk over it before it gives them a zap. So the posts are just as important as a mental deterrence as the rope itself, the hot wire is. So I like to keep them no more than 10-foot spaced so that they can see the post, and their eyesight isn't super phenomenal, so they'll see the post, and that'll kind of give them a mental cue that, hey, there's wire there. So so we'll go on up to the front and we'll take a look at another implementation of electric fence. See you folks in a bit. Okay. So our other application of electric fence is a permanent electric fence fixture. It's not temporary, it's not moving, it stays fixed in its place. So here we have a very similar charger that I have out in the field. The only difference is the brand, and to be completely honest with you, I'm pretty sure they're made by the same people. They just slap a different sticker on it for a different supplier and store. But the way that I've got it set up here is we have insulated leads, and then it's tied into the hot wires on the hot side. Then my ground wire is set up on these copper ground rods. Now, do you need 3 of them sunk into the ground? Maybe not, but you could probably get away with just one. In fact, out in the pasture and the temporary setup, it is just clipped to one T-post. But this being a more permanent fixture, it didn't hurt to kind of go overkill to ensure that we've got good ground for this fence. And this one's also running a little bit more length of fence. It's running approximately 1.5 miles, mile to 1.25 miles-ish or so of fence. So so it is running a little bit more. Now, a few methods and tricks involving, so this charger is charging all of these areas here have electric fence to protect from predators, and then out there to keep the pigs in. So how do I get it across gates? Well, in this particular instance, I've used these insulated wire leads and buried the wire across to get to this side. And I've done so with any areas that I needed to get a hot wire across a gate area. Now, when dealing with certain animals, i.e. pigs, you may need to be smart about your placement of where you bury that lead, because you don't want to necessarily do it right in the gate, because they will root up to the gate and maybe unbury that wire. So you want to put it on the other side of the gate where the pigs can't reach to root it up. So this is similar setup, same solar. That way I didn't have to run power out to from the house to here, which wouldn't be a long distance to run power, but realistically, cost-wise, those solar units are not that much more expensive than an AC powered unit. Girl, I'm trying to do a video. Good. Thank you. Okay. So this fencing serves two purposes. This electric fencing, this particular run of electric fence, not only does it protect the chickens and rabbits from predators by having that low hot wire down there, but it also keeps the pigs in the pasture out here on this side. And in this particular instance, like right here, the pigs are going to be kept up off of the fence and they're not going to come near it. So we talked about the idea of training your animals to fencing, electric fencing, and you have to, because this electric fence is not a deterrent enough per se without some training. They need to learn when they hit that fence, they need to turn around and go back, not try and go through it. They need to know what it is that's shocking them. And so that's why in the pig's pen, I have set up the same type of wire that I'm using elsewhere out in the pasture. And if you notice, I also have some T-post clips, some T-post insulators, and I also have some step-in stakes here. And the reason for that, the reason I did both, is because I use both styles in that pasture, in this front pasture. So I wanted them to associate the visual cues of those posts, plus the insulators, plus that poly rope. They're aware that they don't want to touch that. So a training pen requires good physical fencing, so that way when you first get them and they know nothing about electric fence, when they come up to it and they get zapped, they can't run through it. They turn around and head back. And so you keep them pinned up for about a week, and that's enough time for pigs to be very well trained on electric fence. Now the pigs, when we got them, they weren't trained on electric fence. Where the place that we get them from does not use electric fence in their operation. So we have to train them when we first get them. They go in that pen and stay there for a week. Realistically, it only takes a couple days, and then they'll walk up, they see the wire, they look at it, and they turn around and stop messing with it. Now our cattle, on the other hand, they came from a pasture, from a ranch that already used electric fence. So our Big Mama and Charlie over here were already exposed to it and understand the electric fence. So we didn't have to train them on it. Now with cattle, we'll be setting up a catch pen here in the not so distant future. I just haven't quite got around to it. And if you needed to use that catch pen as a training pen, you can. You set up a catch pen, and then you can use your electric fence, keep them in that catch pen for a few days, and they'll see that fence, they'll experience that shock, and they'll know we don't want to touch this setup. This is why I prefer these style posts or more realistically, the orange ones I have out in the backfield because they're cheaper. But this style with this insulator, because you can adjust the height specifically exactly the way you want it, versus these are easier to set up because they already have your spots to hang your wire, but they're in fixed locations and you really can't do much as far as height adjustment goes on them. So it takes more time to set up those posts with the screw type, because imagine this pasture right here has about 140 or so posts. With these insulators, we had to take, you know, all these insulators and put 140 of them on these 140 posts. And in the back pasture, that particular, you know, each paddock uses about 100 posts. So we've got 200 posts, so we had to put 2 insulators on each one. So that takes a little bit of time and preparation. But once you get it set up, you know, that screw type insulator is just, you know, the only time you really have to mess with it is to adjust the height. I like those. Because of the ability to adjust height. Because right now these pigs, they're gonna get taller, so that fence might have to get moved. That rope may need to be adjusted up a little bit higher, as opposed to like these little guys are much smaller. And so these, you're coming over here smacking your gums, Oreo. What are you up to, Oreo? Just munching away, huh? I don't even know what she's eating. She came out of her little shelter, munching on something. So, so your height is going to need to be adjusted. These are all things taken into consideration when setting up your fence. You need ground posts, and you need your hot wire, and you need insulators, and you need a charger. These are all, they're relatively basic. It's a relatively basic concept as far as how this electricity works. So the way that an electric fence works is you have stored energy in your fence charger. And that stored energy, then in this particular case, it's a pulsing fence. It's not constant shock, it's pulsing. It stores it up and then boom, puts it out there. So your hot lead, and then you have your ground, right? So your ground is grounded into the ground. And what happens when you touch the fence is when you touch it, you are now creating a path to ground, and the electricity flows through you as the person going through to cause that electrical shock, because the electrical current is then flowing through the person or animal touching the fence, as long as you have a path to ground and you're connected to the ground. So that being said, to think about some things, a concept, for instance, would be if you're trying to keep an animal from, you know, hopping a fence or something like that. If an animal is jumping and it's not making contact with the ground and it touches that top wire, it's not going to get shocked by it. If a bird perches on this wire, as long as it's not making contact with ground, it won't get shocked by it. So your most effective uses of fencing for, you know, predation control would be to keep it at the bottom to hopefully prevent the animal from trying to dig underneath. So you know, our electric fence is primarily used to keep animals in, not necessarily keep animals out. We have some to hopefully deter predators, but these particular pens aren't 100% predator proof. Now, having the pigs roam around out here is a discouragement to a lot of the predators that would look at these birds and these rabbits as snacks. But we have that electric fence as kind of a backup. If a raccoon decides to mosey on over here, and in order to get onto the fence, to climb it, to go over, it would likely come in contact with that bottom wire, and then it would get shocked, and then it'd say, no, I'm not going to deal with this. And there are specific types of fences that are designed for, you can buy fence chargers that are more geared towards predation control to keep animals out. These are more geared towards livestock fences. The pulse timing is more for livestock. And that really honestly is why but when it comes to wild animals, they're not going to necessarily associate that poly rope and say, oh, hey, I don't want to touch that. You need it to pulse faster so that it gives an opportunity for them to get shocked. The downside to it pulsing faster in the instance of like a livestock is that you have higher energy requirements, and typically a lot of times you have less battery capacity when it comes to a faster pulse, and so like your output, your actual shock output will be lower, because in order to maintain that, if it's a battery operated system, in order to maintain battery life, it can't put out as high of an output. So the livestock fences are going to put out a higher output, but at a shorter pulse or a longer pulse interval. So it'll shock, 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 and it could do a higher output. Now your predation control, and some fences have two different settings, like the more expensive charge controllers. So it'll be a faster shock, like shock, 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 but it has a lower output, because if it's battery operated, you have battery life to be concerned with, especially because you only can get so much solar charge throughout the day with these panels. So it lowers the output to increase the pulse width, so that way it's pulsing faster. So those are some things to think about. If you're getting a fence specifically for predation, predators and wild animals, keeping wild animals out of a specific spot, you'll want something for that. You want something that has a faster pulse than your livestock style chargers. I have livestock style chargers because that's their primary function, and the pigs get an opportunity to experience that shock by being in that training pen. They're pretty curious animals. They will naturally come up to it, and they like to put their nose right on it, which is one of their most sensitive parts. And so that sensitive nose touches that, and they get a shock, and it only takes 1 or 2 shocks, and they have figured out, hey, that is the thing I don't want to touch. So that's kind of the electric fence 101, the different applications and where you can use them, what you can use them for, and how you can use them. Again, it is a very good, cost-effective means of setting up temporary fencing and allowing to section off certain paddocks within your pasture, and it is the best method, I think, as far as cost goes, and the ability to be very modular with your pasture sizes and locations when you're doing rotational grazing. It's just the best option. That does require, like I said, a little bit of preparation, because you have to train your animals. But once you have them trained on electric fence, they'll respect that wire, and especially when it comes to pigs. Pigs really only need to experience it a couple times, and they stay clear of that fence. So that's your electric fence for you. If you have any ideas for any videos or any topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. If you feel I've missed anything and you've got some knowledge to impart to the rest of the world, to any of the other viewers, feel free to drop a comment in there and tell us, you know, any tips that you may have when it comes to electric fence and what styles you like to use. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos and any more cute baby rabbits. Look at this little guy. You are just a tiny one. Oh, look at him go. There's a rabbit pile right here. So you don't miss anything, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we will see you all next time back at the ranch.